Do you want to have a cutting edge advantage in the global business world? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Dr. Maja Zelihic. She is a Fulbright Specialist, full professor, and a department chair of the Advanced Management Studies at the Forbes School of Business and Technology. She is a co-founder of Dima Innovations. Dr. Zelihic is also a global dialogue partner at NAFSA, which is the world's largest nonprofit association dedicated to international education. She serves on the board of multiple global organizations, has published over 20 peer-reviewed journals, and has received several honored awards and grants for her studies. And she's spoken in over 20 countries and has co-authored the book, The Power of Perception, with Dr. Diane Hamilton. We're actually going to be talking about that book today. And both ladies, actually, Dr. Diane Hamilton and Dr. Maja Zelihic, were listed recently in the Global Leaders Today Top 100 Inspirational Leaders in 2022. And big congratulations to them. They are listed alongside Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Oprah. So this lady is a powerhouse. She is changing the world, and we're just excited to have her here. Welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Nicole. Really a pleasure, and greetings to all of your listeners.
Oh, thank you. Well, and today we're going to talk about the power of perception, and we're going to talk about how people can use it to eliminate boundaries and become a successful global leader based on your research. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. But before we do that, we do want to do a shout out to Larry Robertson. Larry was actually on this show a few months ago in episode 410. So I would highly recommend checking that out. And he recommended Maja to the show, and actually Diane Hamilton as well. And so we're just really grateful for those that support this show, not only as amazing guests, but then going and referring other amazing guests. So thank you, Larry, for that.
Yeah, absolutely. A shout out to Larry Robertson. I'm currently serving a tenure as the interim dean with the Forbes School of Business and Technology, University of Arizona Global Campus. And here with the Forbes School of Business and Technology, we have the advisory board. And the advisory board are all the industry experts that are helping us with our curriculum, making sure our programs are relevant and applicable. And speaking of Larry Robertson, this week we actually offered him a spot to serve on that board. So we're very excited about Larry joining us, and we are very excited to get his input, his expertise, and his opinions pertaining to what's happening in the world of business as it correlates to the world of education. So definitely a big shout out to Larry, and thank you for having me again on the show.
Oh, that's fantastic. Fantastic. And yeah, Larry is amazing. We talked about his book, Rebel Leadership, and such a wealth of knowledge that he has. So I know he's going to bring huge, huge value to your organization. So that is awesome. Now, let's talk about this book on perception, The Power of Perception. How did you come to writing a book on perception in the first place?
I mentioned it in a few places, but the story cannot change because it is a true story. So I'm going to share it with you and your listeners. Diane and I used to work together, and she was at that point of time an MBA chair, and I was chairing the MAOM program. And a lot of times we were in situations with the Forbes School of Business and Technology on the receiving end of some managerial messages. And for whatever reason, as we were developing as colleagues and as friends, a lot of times Diane heard one thing and I heard just the opposite as far as what our managers were trying to convey. And one of the extreme examples was when they were announcing to us that there was a big change that was coming. And Diane walked out of that meeting all optimistic, and she literally called me. She's like, "We're getting a promotion." I, on the other hand, said, "We're going to lose our jobs." And that was the point of time when we actually had a good laugh pertaining to that, where our perception from hearing the identical message was so vastly different that at first we laughed about it. And then we started saying to ourselves, what's impacting our perception? How can two intelligent women leaders walk into the same meeting, being on the receiving end of the very same message, and walk away with such a vastly different perception? That is how the book came about. It came about as a joke. Speaking of which, Diane was right, I was wrong.
I was going to ask that. Which was it?
Well, I'm currently an interim dean with the Forbes School of Business, so clearly I did not lose my job. But at this point of time, we started working through the what's impacting our perception. You know, our personalities are somewhat similar, but also vastly different in certain areas. Our life experience in particular was incredibly different. We are both female leaders in the same area of business, and we also are highly educated, and hopefully we're both intelligent. So those were the similar traits, but then there were a lot of different variables impacting why I heard one thing versus what Diane heard, and we pinpointed our differences to the life experiences and the concept of uncertainty, some of the things that I went through in my life. And ultimately, that is how the book came about. We started looking at different variables impacting perception as it relates to the world of business and as it relates to the concept of global leadership.
So what shapes our perception in the first place? I mean, you had two women. I know that there's a lot of talk about gender and all that, but here were two women having very different ideas. So I'm just curious, what are some of the factors?
Well, we looked at so many different things. We're looking at the cultural experience. We were looking at gender, because gender does impact perception quite a bit. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm doing the virtual conference. It's actually a big conference in Croatia, in Zagreb, and I'm actually going to be talking about the female leadership and how perception impacts the concept of female leadership. We were looking at the regular, for lack of better words, regular intelligence. We were looking at the emotional intelligence. We were looking at the concepts of curiosity and the concepts of culture. And I already mentioned the concept of personality traits, characteristics, and also life experiences. So we were looking at so many different variables that are ultimately impacting our perception. For example, you and I are talking right now. We met previously prior to the show, and we formed certain opinions, we had a certain perception of each other. We're doing it even as we're discussing these topics. And a lot of times we are not necessarily aware of the mechanisms impacting our perception because they're so deeply embedded into our the way we process things. Sometimes we'll pursue a mental shortcuts. We're trying to expedite that process of perception in order to make better decisions and in order to protect ourselves. So those are all the things that we looked at.
So when I think about this, I think about how do you know what's real in the midst of perception, right? Like, you know, when you think about different people having the same experience and actually having very different perception of what actually happened, seriously, how do you actually identify what really went on, or does it even matter at all?
Well, we've done a lot of stories in our book, because our book, we're both academics and we are writing academic research articles, but we do know that only research community is reading those articles. So we were very mindful of the fact that our book will be grabbed by some business leaders that are not necessarily in the world of academia. So we did a lot of stories. For example, Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners are chained to the walls of the cave, and the puppeteers are moving behind their backs, and all they're seeing is the reflection of those objects on the walls of the cave. Well, those shadows, that's their reality. So a lot of times we're looking in a business world at the shadows that our minds created, and that is our reality. A lot of times in the book, we're focusing on that concept of the fluid business reality. And this is something because we're trying to develop global leaders that they have to be mindful of. How do I communicate? How do I come across where the quote unquote average employee is going to understand the message that I'm trying to project? Because yet again, back to your point, is there such a thing as a reality? It is my reality versus your reality. You and I can be together on a vacation and come back, and you may tell your other friends, this was the worst time of my life. I, on the other hand, may be bragging, this was the best time I've ever had. And we were on the receiving end of these type of situations in life. As a matter of fact, I went with two friends to Europe in 2010, and we did come back with 3 different stories to the point that our significant others were like, we will never know what happened, So that is, so we have to be mindful of the fluid concept of reality, fluid concept of the business reality, but direct our behaviors and our communication as close as possible to that reality that we're striving to have within any industry.
Got it. So the goal isn't necessarily it's not the right or wrong. It's about the communication, and as a leader to communicate in such a way that it's clear and it's what Tony Robbins talks about. Communication is the response you get. So how do leaders actually do that? When we're talking about they need to do that, there might be some leaders thinking, I have no idea. Where do I start with that?
Well, we first need to be aware of our perception, how we process things. And in lieu of that, we created the perception index that we actually are offering in addition to the book. And as a matter of fact, the book is almost like a supporting material. The perception index is what we're working on with the companies, because the companies want to assess their leadership perceptions first and foremost, the mechanisms impacting the perception of their leaders, and then also distribute this to their employees to understand what impacts the perception of their employees. So going back to your question pertaining to the communication, let me go back to my original story. I still understood why I perceived the message in that meeting the way I have. The leadership used the terminology of the drastic changes coming. So in my head, drastic was not a positive word. They were also saying, some of you may like the change, the others will have additional tasks. Yet again, it's all about messaging. It's all about the word choice. I do feel, and this is where Diane and I kind of went back and forth, I do feel that message could have been better, because that is what I've heard, drastic. Some of you may not like it. Those were the triggers. It's not as if I walked away out of that meeting completely unreasonable in my perception. There were certain words, there were certain triggers that clearly were not working well with my perception of good things are happening. So it is the choice of words. It is being mindful of your audience, is being aware of how your employees perceive what you're about to deliver, and being mindful of what matters to them. So what we're doing with the index is we're trying to correlate the mechanisms impacting perception to the effectiveness of a business. And that's what we're working on when we work with companies. This is not just the nice to have, oh, this is how I perceive things in life. When people say, oh, I'm an optimist, I'm a pessimist, yeah, that impacts situations in life as well. Your state of mind, absolutely. However, there's so much more to that. It is actually almost to the level of it being an exact science, and one can also predict what the others are going to do. So if I know how you perceive things, if I'm choosing my words carefully, I can even predict your reaction, and I can proactively change my message in order not to get the reaction from you that may not be good for the business.
Got it. So this index, I know you've got some different elements that you look at. So talk to us about what it measures and how that works.
Well, there's a lot of things that were being observed, like a culture quotient, curiosity quotient, emotional intelligence, regular intelligence. And what we're also doing is we're looking through this process, the process we call the EPIC process, from the evaluating oneself, evaluating my own perception. I am mindful of the fact that by the very nature of my personality type, and I'm blaming my life experiences, I'm not an optimistic person. I'm very jovial. I'm actually a fun person, but I'm not an optimist. So you cannot judge the book by its cover. So I am mindful of the fact that a lot of times in many different settings in life, I will jump to the worst case scenario. And I am aware of it. Because of that, I can control it better. So my gut reaction to respond right away, that when I was younger, I was like compelled to respond right away to eliminate the uncertainty. I learned and I trained myself to step back, reflect, and then speak. And kind of basic, right? It was a process for me. So evaluate is being aware of your own self. Predict what you're going to do with my message. If I have to deliver, a lot of times in the business world, I mean, let's be real, especially in lieu of everything that's happening in the world right now, everything that's happening as a result of the pandemic, a lot of things that were delivered in the last few years were not positive. So I do have to predict and anticipate your reaction. And what will be some of the key phrases for me to use? What will be some of the examples that I may share with you in order for your reaction to be not necessarily minimized? Maybe that's what I'm striving for, but at least your reaction is not going to be as concerning, as negative, or impacting the overall project that we're on right now. And then we are interpreting. We're interpreting all these signals, everything that's happening between us, and correlating. So that is the epic process. So the perception power index is geared towards business leaders, predominantly companies, in order to evaluate how their employees are processing things, how their leaders are processing things, in order to correlate that with how to be more effective in the world of business, how to be a better global leader. Because a lot of times, cultural differences impact perception quite a bit. We know this. And I don't know of a company nowadays that can say that, oh, we're not a global company. I mean, you are operating in today's time and age. You are a global company. So those are the type of things that we did. We are trying to develop not just leaders, to develop global leaders.
So what I hear also in this, and I know it's subtle, but I think it's important to bring to the forefront, is also the fact that this is an organic process. This is a continuing process. This is not like, oh, that person responds this way, and so I can assume that they're always going to respond that way, because like you just said, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of negativity, and so that will skew somebody's perception. So how they might have perceived it 3 years ago and how they'll perceive it today will be different because of the input that they have received in the process. And so similarly, it's recognizing, what I'm hearing is also recognizing what input am I receiving and taking in that is going to color my perception. So on the other side, as an employee, and of course as a leader, right? I mean, I laugh. One of the things that you had in your book was a leader that said, that's impossible. I'm a great leader. There was in one of the chapters. And how often have I heard that, where people, it's like the worst thing you can do is, how are you as a leader? I'm a fantastic leader. Of course they're going to say that. But then you get the feedback through, whether it's a 360 or like, something like what you're doing, your index, that all of a sudden they start to see it in a whole different light. And so it's important that we recognize what's actually coming in and what's influencing that perception.
Absolutely. A lot of things that were used in the book were actually based on true stories. And I used to work, prior to the world of academia, I used to work in the financial industry. I was with the Merrill Lynch Credit Corporation for many, many years. And actually that was a true story. I was in my 20s, and it was 6, 7 of us. We went to the upper management because we absolutely could not work with our manager. He was incredibly, I would say, borderline abusive. And what struck me as odd, not necessarily even at the time struck me as odd, but I was just thinking to myself, he's delusional. And I was also a bit immature, and I don't know that I knew how to process things in life as good perhaps as I can do now. I heard him say, this is impossible. Everyone complained. I'm an excellent leader. So that's actually what, not only he was not a leader, he was a lousy manager, because there's a difference. So we're not even talking leadership. It's kind of one of those things. You did not even graduate to the level of leader. You're still a horrible manager. But it did struck me as odd that his perception of his own self, of his mannerisms, behaviors, interactions with us, in his mind was very positive. Because a lot of times, if we give person a benefit of a doubt, a lot of times, and it does tie with emotional intelligence, you have to step back, like that concept, step back and reflect. Not everyone's out there to harm you. Not everyone's, well, there are some people that do, but not everyone's out there to really make it a difficult business environment. Sometimes you have to put yourself in their shoes and understand the way they process things. And that is the whole concept of understanding one another and having an open mind. Reflecting now after all these years, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if he was intentionally aiming to be a horrific manager. He didn't know any better. He was not really guided, coached, and he did not understand how he comes across.
Yeah. And intention, like you mentioned about intention, he may have had the intention to be an effective manager. And that's why the feedback actually shocked him, because his intention was so different than what the outcome was. Talk about actually, it was one of the questions I had for you is what's the difference between a leader and a manager?
Well, there's so much literature as far as in a lot of research. I mean, a manager is someone that is effectively completing the tasks within the company and hitting the goals, and they can hit goals very successfully. Leader is definitely, not to use cliche phrases, someone that inspires, that motivates you to do better, that helps you grow, that really understands you as a person, understands how you perceive things, no pun intended, and is able to tap into your potential and develop the skill sets that you may not have, and also to work towards helping you enhance some of those qualities that you may have already, but they're hidden or not developed. That is truly a leader. And throughout my career, in many different places, I am actually, okay, this is my perception. I encountered many more managers, effective managers. I've encountered only a few individuals that I would consider true leaders.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that those managers were getting the job done and companies were thriving. You can thrive with managers too, not dismissing their qualities, but the leadership, that is a higher level that we all, no matter the industry, we should strive towards. And that requires much more than just accomplishing the company's goals.
Yeah. And that goes back to the perception they have of what the role requires, and what they were hired for. So very interesting. Let's shift gears to the male-female perception. How do men and women perceive the workplace differently?
Well, tomorrow, like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about it at this conference, and we had a story in the book of a gentleman and a lady sitting in the museum and looking at the painting, and she's saying something along the lines of, I love the way the sun hits the barn and the old man's face, and so serene and so beautiful. And the gentleman saying, and of course this is oversimplifying, the gentleman saying is, this barn needs painting, meaning like it's pretty old. We do process things differently. We actually, our minds are, wired differently. And every time when we, recently, as we're attempting to erase all the differences, I don't think that we should be doing that. The beauty is in our differences, in the way we process things. We do realize that women are sometimes labeled as too emotional when they are showcasing the same level of passion that their male counterparts are showcasing. Also, if a woman is trying to suppress those of her natural qualities, the nurturing, the empathy, the passion, at that point of time, the woman is more likely to be labeled as cold and quote unquote cruel and micromanager, whereas the same type of behavioral patterns with a male counterpart will be perceived as strength. We cannot dismiss those perceptual differences, and we cannot dismiss the impact of perceptual differences when it comes to the gender bias. Gender bias is still alive and well at a workplace, and a lot of times, even when you are trying not to necessarily focus on it too much, you do need to be observant. What I'm noticing with my female colleagues, including myself, we tend to over-explain. And I'm not sure why we're doing this. I'm doing this in my personal life as well. It seems to me like I'm delivering an essay to my family members why I want one shampoo versus the other. Ultimately, no one cares. Mom, tell us which one you want. That's what my son tells me. Just tell me which one you want. I don't need to know like 17 things like the ones that you don't like. I caught myself doing it. I also catch myself doing it at work. And I did notice that more so with our female colleagues. This morning, as I woke up this morning drinking coffee, I was on LinkedIn and I looked at some of those memes, and they were using certain phrases the way female leaders use. I'm not sure if this is silly. I am not sure if this is on point. I am not sure. We're constantly over-explaining the points that we're making, whereas our male counterparts are just saying it. I don't know that they care much if it was silly or if it was on point. They felt the need to say it. Now, I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where we all saying things the same way, and I don't know that we should.
Yeah.
But at the same point of time, we have to recognize those differences. And I don't like when we're dismissing them altogether and making it sound as if they don't exist in the workplace, because I'm mindful of those differences every single day.
Yeah. I love what you said there about not needing to actually eliminate those differences, because then we all sound the same and then we lose the uniqueness. However, to your point about if we say, I'm not sure, and then we wonder why men don't have any confidence or less confidence in the boardroom, because a woman is like doubting herself. She's second guessing. It sounds like second guessing when maybe she's just trying to put it in a different way. And so there is that perception on the other end as to how she's perceived. Is she confident? Does she know? If she's saying, I don't know if this is silly or not, is she questioning it? And if she's questioning it, well, then maybe I should too. And I should question her. And so then it creates, so it's kind of like either it works or it doesn't work. Noticing what I'm hearing you say is that it's like perception is what it is, but is it working to get us the result that we're looking for, or is it not? Mm-hmm. And I heard at one point somebody said, I was one of my guests on the show, talked about women who they nod in meetings a lot. And that can be, and men kind of like are more static. And so it can sound like or appear like we're more agreeable, that we're trying to be accepted and so forth, and or very accepting. And that can sound or appear be perceived as a little bit of a submissive position, whereas men are just like solid. And so I'm paraphrasing what they said, but it's interesting. So as women, we go, why do they treat me like that? Well, part of it is their perception, naturally their perception, or maybe their, the culture and all that. But part of it is actually how we show up. And so if we want a different outcome, maybe we need to look at changing our approach so that we get that different outcome.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if your audience can see me as you're talking about this. I'm nodding the entire time. So, and I was never aware of me doing that, but I'm as you're talking, I'm noticing myself nodding.
Yeah. And I do it too. I do it all the time. You check out my podcast. I'm nodding with my guests. Yes.
It's a fine line. We need to be aware of certain things. I am now mindful of not doing these disclaimers. I am not sure if this is on point. I am not sure if this is relevant. I am actually trying to suppress those sentences. Right. And I try to open up by saying, my suggestion is. And then if they disagree with me, it's okay. Let me know as to why. You can end with, if you need that disclaimer, if anyone has a different opinion, let me know why. That is much stronger than me introducing my statement with a doubt. But I also feel like we have to be mindful of our strengths and our qualities and not suppress those differences, because if we are basically striving to turn into male leaders, what is the point? Look at the times of pandemic. A lot of research across the world has been showcasing that female leaders have done much better job during the years of pandemic than male leaders. Not to go into the world of politics, but it's very hard not to, considering everything that's happening in the world right now. Male leaders are the ones usually in the position of power, and those are the ones that are starting wars. So a lot of times when you look at and we don't have that many examples of the top level female leaders, but it does appear that they're much more calculated as to even in the times of conflict. And this is where our tendency to over-explain and over-analyze comes across much better versus, no pun intended, pulling the trigger without thinking. So I would advocate working within the parameters of differences and working within our strengths, because we truly complement each other. And every time I've seen a female leader who trained herself to mimic her male counterparts, that does not come across well either. So it is a balancing act, but there are certain things that we can minimize. I don't think I'm going to stop nodding. I think I've been nodding my entire life. So I'm just going to continue nodding because I feel like I want to support you as you're making your point.
Yes, I'm doing it.
I'm doing it to support you. I'm with you. I also feel that concept of, yet again, we are nurturers. We are more, it is a fact. We are more empathetic. We are the ones that are rescuers. We are the ones that will take care of you. Those are skills. Those are skill sets. I mean, the research, male, female brain. I mean, the brains are wired differently. So, let's not dismiss those differences for the sake of us all. We're not going to be these on autopilot. Leadership on autopilot never works.
Yeah. Well, and I heard somebody once say that when women try to be men, then it's even more confusing because now the men are like, nah, I really don't know how to deal with this. So
there are certain things that I'm mindful of. I was accused of being emotional when I was passionate. I'm very passionate about my work. I do have very strong opinions. My strong opinions and my passion is sometimes mislabeled as emotional. And I know for a fact, if a male counterpart does the same thing using the same words, the same phrases, the same sentences, he would not have been accused of being emotional. He would have been accused perhaps of being too strong, too assertive. So I am mindful of that, and that is one of the things that bothers me quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I think about one of my clients, actually. She has several of my clients who are women, are high performing women, and they have male counterparts or leaders that are like founders of companies and so forth that are men. And just what you just said there is exactly what they're experiencing is that they're passionate, they're committed, they're high performers, and like really that can hold their own in any situation. And yet when they communicate, sometimes it's being misinterpreted as emotional because maybe there's the body language and the tone and all of it that's going with it. And because of the perception, and we've got to realize also that men have a perception just like we do that we're taking from our personal life into our workplace as well. And so there's all these different inputs, if you will, that is creating our perception. So this is such an important conversation, Maja, and thank you for bringing it to the forefront, you and Diane, through your own experience so that others can learn and you can, like you said, help build not just leaders, but global leaders, because we're talking about people, we may have vendors, we may have clients all around the world, or people that are literally living in this country and the same country as us, but that have cultural, differences and experiences that are different. And so if we want to be able to lead well, we need to understand what's going through their mind. I think of one of my mentors who says, go into their world first. And Tony Robbins, who also says, if communication is the response you get. So if you want to deliver a certain communication, you want it delivered in a certain way, then it's our responsibility to tailor our communication so that we get the response that we are looking for. That it is interpreted, and that's our responsibility as much as it is, yes, theirs. But as leaders, the responsibility really does lie more on us to do that. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. And how do people, where do they start? You mentioned about the perception index. They start there. We'll make sure there's a link in the show notes.
Yeah, the book is on Amazon. I know you're going to post the link, and also Dr. Diane's website actually has the perception index information, and we do have some videos, we have some explanations, and also especially the corporate leaders, the HR leaders, if they're interested in implementing the perception index amongst their employees, they can get in touch with us. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so I encourage all of your listeners to contact me on LinkedIn and engage with me there. And you will also post my Twitter handle. And as we joked previously, I'm kind of still trying to test the Twitter, so I'm not getting it as much as I'm getting LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is my a strong suit as far as networking and collaboration.
Awesome, Maja. Thank you so much for just taking a few minutes out of your busy day to share with us today and shed some light on this area and the opportunity that we actually have to be able to transform our leadership style, be able to transform our organizations, bringing awareness. I was talking to a client the other day, and he's 55 years old, and he really doesn't know, what he thinks about, things like it's so much on autopilot, and how much of us, we live on autopilot. But what you're doing is bringing light to it so that we can understand this machine that we have been operating, like in his case, I said, you've been operating this machine for 55 years and you're not familiar with how it works. Well, first of all, it's like, let's figure out how it works and what's going on in there. And then we can start to create transformation, because the first step to transformation is awareness. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And for our listeners, I would encourage you, go to the web. We're going to make sure all the links are in the show notes, so you can go there to find those. But the Perception Index, if you're a leader, HR manager, and you want to be able to implement this into your organization, go check that out. Also, the book, The Power of Perception, we'll make sure that's there as well. LinkedIn. We also will have the website, so you can connect with Maja through her website and Twitter handles and so forth. I believe that leaders of transformation take action, and maybe that action is just stopping for a moment before you jump onto the next podcast or the next thing today that you're doing, and stop and ask yourself what influences your perception. And that the epic, the epic for the power the perception index, the four things is evaluation, prediction, interpretation, and correlation. That first one is evaluation. Start to become aware of what it is that is the filter in which you see the world. And I do believe that the filter in which we see others is determined by the filter that we see through which we see ourselves. So how we see ourselves will impact how we see others and how we see the world around us. So even if it's starting there, or it's getting the book that these ladies have written, and The Power of Perception, and getting the information so that you can become a better leader. But start somewhere. Just listening to the podcast, it's wonderful. You get great information, but it's only when you act upon that information that transformation actually happens. So I encourage you that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com and you can reach out to us there. Let us know how this has impacted you. If you like this episode and this has been enlightening to you, and you think there's someone else that would benefit from it, share it with them. Maybe that's the next action is, if there's somebody, maybe it's a partner, a business partner, or a leader that you've been working with, and maybe you can share it with them to start the conversation about perception and how we can change our perception so we can create better results and a better world for everyone. Again, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.